Let's talk about burglary. It's all the rage. It's a legislative side gig, apparently, now.
It apparently has become a new little, I don't know, hobby. So, I mean...
The Hudson-Mekeland Podcast.
I mean, if we're going to be stupid, let's be stupid all in. And I did share your video on the one you sent me, which was protecting the children.
Okay.
The amendment in the committee hearing.
Yeah. Right.
With
yeah.
Pinto. And I'm okay,
Yeah.
So are we recording?
Yep.
I'm literally watching this. I'm going and listening to Pinto. Listening to this, I'm going, okay, I understand there's different factions of your caucus. I get that, right?
Right.
You may or may not agree with certain things, but you help your whatever. This one I didn't get. So either there's a reason why, more outside than politics. There's got to be a reason why.
No, it is well, it's ideology. I mean, pick your poison, right?
But is it ideology or is it a personal preference? Because there are some places on ideology where I think many of us will not go. There are things that are out of bounds. We're talking about children. Mm-hmm. And I listened to everything you said. Was it about a 24-minute video, give or take?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You laid it out really, really well.
I thought so.
And that's my opinion. And he defended his position adamantly. Mm-hmm. And he's a lawyer. He's a prosecuting attorney. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at this, and I'm asking myself questions going, where are you coming from? Mm-hmm. Because your number one job should be to protect. Government is to solely protect the citizens. Mm-hmm. And now we're talking about kids. Mm-hmm. Help me get to where the hell he was going.
Okay, so first of all, I think for the sake of listeners and viewers, give a little bit of background. So Representative Lee Finke introduced a bill that was hurting children and families that provided, in its original form, because it changed a couple of times, in its original form, it provided a $200,000 appropriation to hand over to a named entity. By the way, as an aside, as you and I both know, the Office of Legislative Auditor, which is a nonpartisan group, has warned us as legislators directly in reports saying this is a terrible practice. You should not be, I'm paraphrasing obviously, you should not be naming organizations in statute to receive state funds because it gives you no ability to claw that money back in the event that there's some reason, I don't know, they're buying mansions, feeding our future, it comes to mind. You don't have any enforcement mechanism for them to take care of things that ought to properly be taken care of. And so sidestepping that, which they just have ignored that. I mean, it's been named entity after named entity in legislation passed for the past year and a half since we first heard this report. This one was going to give to an organization called Our Space for the purpose of doing a needs analysis for LGBT youth homelessness.
Correct.
Now, at first, when we took a look at this in committee, we chose to focus on the lack of bona fides in the organization that's named Our Space. It's only been around 3 years, not contiguously. Their registration lapsed and they had to re-up it. No financials online. You don't even know who's on the board. I mean, it's just a completely nebulous organization.
And this is a nonprofit.
Yes.
Is it non-governmental or nonprofit?
Nonprofit, I believe.
Okay. Which should all be public.
Yep. Should be.
Well, that's required.
Right. Well, it's not on their website. Right. So, in response to that, they changed the bill, according to Vice Chair Keeler, to instead name the Wilder Foundation. That was the second version that we saw. Wilder Foundation, a much better known entity. Okay. Turns out, and I learned this after the fact, Wilder Foundation was like, thanks, but no thanks. Like, we've got enough stuff going on. We're not interested in doing this. Or not that they're not interested, but that they don't have the ability to ramp up to do it because because they're an organization that has bona fides, there are layers of authorizations that need to take place. You can't just decide that we're going to do something as the legislature. And so they switched a third time to a third-party vendor. So they're not even going to name the organization or provide any process through how we're going to determine who that third-party vendor is. I guess it's going to be up to the commissioner. Law doesn't even say that, right? And so the law comes back, and at this point, between the first hearing and when it got in this omnibus bill that we heard last week, I've been doing some thinking about this situation. I'm thinking to myself, when Ficky presented this bill, the representative said that the urgent need for it was because of disproportionate representation of LGBT youth in the homeless population due to, and this is pretty much verbatim, employment and housing discrimination and family rejection. And that third component really threw me for a loop because I'm saying to myself, well, family rejection, what the hell are you talking about? Like, if a family is rejecting their kid in the form of kicking them out of the house, providing no opportunity for them to have any alternative care, we call that criminal child negligence. We have a whole process for dealing with it, both in the criminal justice system and through Child Protective Services. And it doesn't result in kids being homeless. The judge doesn't knock his gavel on the desk and say, all right, hereby homeless, case closed, right? That's not how that works.
Right.
And so the only other situation where quote unquote family rejection would come into play is if the kid voluntarily left the house. And we call those runaways.
Correct.
Right.
But you laid that case out in committee.
I did. And I made the point that if in fact we are going to create a place for runaways to go to, then your needs analysis damn well better take into consideration the custodial rights of parents and legal guardians and precautions to shield children from sexual manipulation and exploitation by adults. Because if you don't do that, then you're just opening it up to the wild, wild west of grooming, right? Because any adult could just say, hey, come meet me at Happy Fun Time LGBT land. And there's no requirement to notify parents. We actually have it explicitly in law in the Trans Refugee Bill and in the PRO Act. No parental notification, no parental consent. We're going to cancel your rights in a custodial arrangements and chop your kid up and give him a bunch of poisons without your consent. I mean, all this stuff is explicit in law. And so I'm making this case in committee, as you saw. And the best argument offered by, as you note, the prosecuting attorney, highly educated and experienced, the best argument that they had on offer was, well, we don't really like the implications of including those provisions in this needs analysis. And again, the provisions were the custodial rights of parents and legal guardians and precautions to shield children from sexual manipulation and exploitation by adults. The exact thing that Pinto said was, this gets in the way of what we're trying to do here.
So okay, you take all of what was said in that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
You go back to last year.
Mm-hmm.
And you couple that with not only the, what do they call it, transgender affirming care bill.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where if somebody from another state, if Aunt Lucy is all bought into it, the parents are not, if they get the kid into the state will not comply with extradition to return the child.
Yeah.
So you couple that then with, I believe it was House File 1 last year, which was the abortion bill, that not only was up to the date of birth, but the more egregious part, which many people didn't catch that, the average public did not catch the part that it also included that a 10, 12-year-old girl, completely unaccompanied by an adult, could walk in and request an abortion.
Right.
With no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
But they could also request to be sterilized.
Yep.
Which is a sex trafficker's dream come true.
Yep.
So this little girl could have a lot of cash to pay the bill. You could have the pimp sitting out in a car out there that just beat the hell out of her.
Mm-hmm.
And saying, you get your butt in there and you fix this problem. because it's your fault, what have you. And now they have a person that they can sell and sell and sell repeatedly with no risk of getting pregnant. And if you think that that person is actually going to give them time to heal after all of that,
Right.
you're absolutely nuts.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's hear no evil, see no evil, Wild Wild West, Groomers Paradise. That's what they've set up in the state of Minnesota. And they're trying to drive it further with this bill and others. Finke dropped another bill on Thursday that I don't remember exactly what it said off the top of my head, but the summary was right to house youth as a tenant. So
Where does that go?
I believe it goes to house.
No. I'm just saying, like, where is the intent of
Right.
where does that
Well,
go?
and that's the question, right? So I had I don't want to betray confidences. I had a conversation with someone
right.
on the other side about this bill. And I asked that question of what are you trying to do here? And it wasn't the author, it wasn't Finke. And they, having just seen it, same as me, and speaking speculatively, were like, well, this is just providing that if a minor child is staying with somebody, then the tenant can't evict the person for having an unauthorized individual in their unit that's not on the lease. And I'm like, really? Like, Finke thought of that, huh? Like, what's the test case? What was the reason? What was the impetus for authoring this bill?
So okay, let's say you and I are brothers, and you live on the East Coast, I live on the West Coast, I live in an apartment, you live in an apartment on whichever coast, and I have you come out to visit, and you stay with me for 2 weeks because you're,
Right.
like, is that a thing? Like,
I don't know.
Where you could be caught, like, being told you can't do that, you can't have visitors.
Yeah, you've had a visitor for 2 weeks. You're in violation of the lease. We're going to evict you. That I've never heard of that happening.
And to narrow it down to specifically what you just said,
Yeah.
makes it look more suspect.
It does, especially in the context of everything else, right? And that's the
Correct.
thing is you've got to put all these pieces together. On the one hand, you're telling me with the PRO Act that a kid can walk into an abortion clinic and get reproductive services, which you have explicitly stated are inclusive of gender-affirming care, sterilization. On the other hand, you've got the trans refugee bill that says that we can cancel custodial arrangements from out of state because if the kid shows up and says the magic words, I'm here for gender-affirming care. Now you've got this other bill that wants to do a needs analysis for LGBT youth homelessness that is basically a vehicle for kids to run away from their parents and then be kept from their parents by a shelter, an LGBT youth shelter, with no notification of those parents and no consent from those parents of any services that they're being provided in the meantime, or let alone just the custodial arrangement, right? Like you're living in this place supervised by God knows who, exposed to God knows who and God knows what, without the parents knowing or having given consent to it. Meanwhile, under the law, they still have custodial control of that child. So you're completely violating the custodial rights of that parent and that legal guardian.
Which I think Rep. Niska has brought this up, I believe, on the floor, that when you cross state lines, this could it then becomes federal, and this could become a challenge.
Oh, I hope it does.
And it should.
Yes.
Because where's like the Jacob Wetterling Foundation on this? Mm-hmm. And what was the other one? John Walsh and their son. With what happened there. Because we see these things all the time. And now we have these people that are literally coming outward and passing some like stuff that I didn't really see coming. I mean, before you got elected, Walter, Mary Franzen went on a rant on female genital mutilation in 2019. And it was like very passionate, and she did an amazing job on it. In that, though, I never would have thought that 4-ish years later I'd be sitting here listening to the same thing justified for every child, not just in a certain culture, not just a certain one of the two genders, but now it's everybody. So I mean, and Mary, I mean, it was a very passionate, tearful speech, or back and forth, but now we're not just talking about mutilating, young girls. Now it's like the whole board is open. And,
Oh yeah,
and they actually seem to advocate for it passionately, and I find that I listen to a lot of what they say, kind of wondering how did you get here? I mean, are you part of this? Because I see it as kind of a demented thing.
well, let's take what they have to say at face value. So to your original question of what's their justification, what they offered in committee was two things that I could glean, and you kind of have to sift through what they're saying in order to discern what they mean, because they don't speak in plain terms. Number one, they don't like the implication of including protections for custodial rights and sexual exploitation in this bill.
Was not attachment in that as well? The word attachment, sexual attachment.
No, you're thinking of the pedo thing from last year,
Okay.
which is right in the same category, right?
Right.
Because they use this exact same excuse for that too, that we don't care about the actual effect of law. What we care about is the implications for what this says about the LGBT community. In other words, it's more important what an LGBT person thinks and feels about this language than what the language actually does, even if, in the case of the pedophilia language in the Human Rights Act from last year, what it does is prevent that from being considered a sexual orientation and therefore a protected class under anti-discrimination law. They're willing to sacrifice that to throw that bathwater out, that baby in the bathwater, in order to achieve the effect of not offending the LGBT community by associating them with pedophilia. And it's the exact same argument here. How dare you insert into a needs analysis for LGBT youth homelessness the idea that we would even need to be concerned about the sexual exploitation of children? It's the clasping of pearls, and I'm so offended that you would even raise that possibility. Therefore, we're not going to protect kids, and we're not going to uphold custodial rights. So that's their argument.
So in this, okay, from a data set, when we talk about LGBTQIA+, I think is what it is now, what is the percentage of population? Last you heard?
I think the highest estimate is 10%, and I think that's being extraordinarily liberal.
Yes. So we are going to throw out all protections for children, all of them, on account of, which I believe it's actually closer to 2 or 3%, probably at best.
Yeah.
At best. And I think that's actually a pretty liberal number. But there's some that have jumped on the bandwagon because it's just the kind of the trend, and they don't actually participate in it; they just say it.
Right. If you control for the social contagion,
right,
it's probably 2 or 3%. Yeah.
And just a few years ago, it was less than 1%. But whatever, they've created a buzz about it. So we have all these school kids that are being told that this is the cool new thing. Mm-hmm. And they don't really understand a lot of the decisions they make. And we're going to throw all the protections out so that we make 1 or 2% of the population not get their feelings hurt. Mm-hmm. How many kids are going to get harmed? That's irreparable harm.
Yep.
There's recently a story about, some stuff coming out of Hollywood.
Yep.
And I believe that's Corey Haim and what he went through prior to committing suicide. Mm-hmm. And it's alleged. I don't know. I wasn't there. But when you look at this stuff and you read this stuff, and there seems to be patterns that are growing because there's more and more people talking about it.
Right.
Particularly in the last few years. And so we're going to, and that was the thing on the House floor last year, particularly on that MAP bill, because it was MAP. It was minor attracted persons. And I was actually kind of dumbfounded going, we created an acronym for that? Mm-hmm. I mean, that in itself was no, it's called a pedophile.
Right.
Now we're calling it a map? So it doesn't sound as bad. It doesn't seem as bad. People don't know what that means. And we're going to use different like terminology because we're going to soften it. It's wordsmithing is at its best, which they're really good at. And we're doing this to protect a handful of people that want to harm children. And I don't get it.
Well, again, it's ideological, right? So the one ideological point is that you mustn't imply that there's any danger from the LGBT community, which means that you can't acknowledge the extent to which there is, just like there is in any given population. Like having a certain demographic status doesn't absolve you from moral depravity, right? Like anybody could be a criminal, anybody could be a sexual predator, regardless of their sexual orientation. So if you have as your axiom, we're never going to imply or allow for or hint at the possibility that anybody who's LGBT could be dangerous, then basically what you're doing is creating a window for danger to enter. That's what they're doing.
So even, okay, take the LGBTQ stuff out of it, play. You have 2 children.
Yep.
When mine, they're a little bit older as yours now, when they wanted to have some of their first sleepovers, do you think I did everything I could to figure out who these people were?
Right.
And not saying they're bad.
Right.
That's my job.
Due diligence.
It's my job to make sure that he or she did not get in a bad situation.
Well, how dare you even imply the possibility that another family living down the block that your kid wants to sleep over at might possibly be a danger to your kid? I mean, that's just so offensive.
But well, they weren't LGBTQ, so they weren't protected.
But this is what I'm saying.
So that's my point. Like, so because they're not in one of those groups, they're still open to scrutiny. That would be okay for you and I to scrutinize, to do a background check, if you will, or do as much as we can to learn. Is it going to be okay if my child goes and spends the night there?
Right.
Because the last thing I ever want to hear is that phone call, like something bad happened. And so, but now because we're a certain little category, we have to be isolated and protected, away from scrutiny or away from speculation. And at the end of the day, that is truly our job. And the bills last year and this year, the way they've been written, where it literally strips parental or guardian rights away.
Yep.
And it takes away, even if they cross a state borderline, that there's no way to get them back.
Yep.
Which I know Representative Niska, he's like the only lawyer we have on our caucus, full-fledged lawyer anyway. There's another one, but he's half-time. But this is his wheelhouse, and he's I believe he went on the House floor and he said this will likely end up in litigation.
Yeah.
Because you're crossing a state line that becomes a federal issue at that point, and you cannot override that. Drew Shadeen was years ago. I don't know if you remember. She was kidnapped here in Minnesota. Then the guy took her to North Dakota, and I believe he killed her, raped her, whatever. And because he crossed state line, that made it a federal case, not just a state case. And so he was sentenced to the death penalty, which I believe a year or two ago they waived that, and so they're not going to do the death penalty because we're softening on crime.
Yeah, right.
But nevertheless, those laws exist, and why I can remember her name I don't know, but because all this stuff had an impact. I mean, I was about pretty much the same age as Jacob Werlein when he got kidnapped back then, and you kind of thought you were beyond that age where it wasn't really a risk anymore,
right?
And then you're realizing, going, actually, you're not.
Right.
I mean, I think we were probably 12, 13, whatever, back then. And you kind of thought you were big enough and, fast enough, smart enough, whatever. And then you see something like that and you realize you're not out of that window yet. And then as you get older and wiser, learn, you realize you're really never out of that window.
That's right.
Especially if you fall into certain characteristics, not demographic, characteristics. Because if you're a smaller frame female, I don't care how old you are, you're prey.
Yep.
If you are a smaller statured male, if they see you with a smartphone in your hand and they want it, they're going to take it.
Yeah.
So there's all of these little things that play into it because no two situations are the same. And then now you have all this, I don't know, depraved mind and some of the stuff that we see. So, yeah, I think we kind of covered this one pretty well.
Well, there's one more thing I want to touch on before we move on, and that is the other reason that they offer for their position on this, on not worrying about parental rights in particular. And that is, and they're very kind of like, they tiptoe around saying this explicitly, but it most definitely is implicit. And if you press them on it, they will confess to it. They regard family rejection, which is to say, they regard the failure to celebrate LGBT status as inherently abusive. Therefore, if mom and dad are anything less than, yeah, let's go down to the pride parade, the very second that little Johnny or little Susie says, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I'm gay, I'm this, I'm that, that becomes an abusive and intolerable situation that they should have the right to escape and emancipate themselves from. And it's such a high level of abuse in their view that we're going to completely circumvent the legal system and provide all of these loopholes for them to get away, to run away.
And so okay, because now you just open up our Pandora's box, but so one of these little kids really believes this is the direction they want to go. They're young. They're easily manipulated. They're naive. They think they know everything. I did myself. I know everything. I was really smart. If you would have just asked me, I would have told you. And they end up in one of these places, and then they get manipulated into a physical thing with an adult. There's no way out at that point.
No.
And there's no undoing it.
That's right.
So even if they're like thinking maybe they want to be this, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I don't even understand all the emotions. I don't understand all the hormones, which we all went through that. But now they've truly been violated.
Yeah.
So, and I years ago I had a really close friend that he was raped as a young male. And when he finally confessed that he was gay because he assumed that once he became of age and started to want to date, that any female would know. He assumed that it would be obvious somehow. And so he didn't see a path back.
Yep.
And he was actually an executive for one of the largest companies here in Minnesota, and absolutely a wonderful guy. But to hear that story, and then you kind of couple that with some of the stuff we see out of other sectors of life, and in the suicide rate, if you will, because these people got violated.
Yep.
And this is where I am concerned where this is going to end up.
Yeah.
Because you have prime targets.
Yes. And we talk about cycles of violence, right? The correlation between sexual abuse and these identities is significantly higher than the average population. I met with 4 mothers last week, each of whom, like, they were there to talk about this gender identity and its status in Minnesota. And the thing that they had in common is that they each had daughters, or granddaughter, as the case may be, who had been groomed by a school or a counselor or somebody that's not them without their knowledge, and made the decision to begin transition. One of those mothers, and again, got to emphasize, without parental consent, without parental notification. It's just they show up one day and it's, hi, Mom, my name's different. I'm a different gender now. I'm undergoing this stuff. My teacher's been helping me. My counselor's been helping me. I'm sorry, what? Like, I'm your parent. I'm the person who gets to decide how your life is going to go until such time as you have the cognitive wherewithal to make decisions on your own. But be that as it may, one of these mothers told me, she said, if this had been an option for me when I was that age, I can tell you almost definitely I would have done it. Why? Because she was sexually assaulted as a child. And in the wake of her sexual assault, she wanted to escape her femininity. She wanted to downplay, and she went out of her way through clothes and behavior and what have you to try to minimize and hide her feminine characteristics and nature, because in her mind, it was dangerous to be a woman.
It made her a target.
Right. And so it took her, she said that it wasn't until she was a grown adult and she got pregnant with her child, who's now being abused through the system and the state of Minnesota. It wasn't until then that she kind of rediscovered and became comfortable with the idea of being a woman and being feminine and the beauty of it, the power of it. But think about that. Like, how many of these kids that are heading in this direction are victims of sexual assault, and this is how they're coping with it. And instead of dealing with that, instead of rooting that out, instead of going after their perpetrators, instead of making them feel safe in their own bodies, we're guiding them towards poisoning and mutilating themselves because it makes us feel good.
Not us. A few.
Yeah.
A few.
Yeah. Right.
Cautionary. Them.
Right.
And very few of them.
Yeah.
But we're going to isolate out that little sector that they have to not feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to take what is the population of 0 through 17, 18, whatever. It's probably traditionally 20%. I'm guessing of the population,
Something
give
like
or
that.
take.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit higher than that actually. The life expectancy is dropping down a little bit now, but in the latest numbers. So we're literally going to put that group in harm's way for this little tiny group over here.
To feel self-actualized.
So they don't have their feelings hurt.
Yep.
And that's sadly where states like ours, Michigan, Washington State, Oregon, California, New York, and a handful of others, this is the direction they're going.
You got it.
And it's almost ironic that we see the same bills or very similar bills in a very similar time frame. Could be even the same week, sometimes even the same day. That there was one, I think it was the year before you got elected, and it was the cultural hair bill in 2022. And at the exact same time, it was on the U.S. Congress floor under the control of Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, I remember that.
At the exact same time.
Yep.
And it was like word for word the same.
The
I'm
same
like,
bill. Yeah.
Okay, you clearly did not write this bill because they're saying word for word. I mean, statute numbers are a little bit different, obviously. Yeah. They changed that U.S. code versus statute numbers, but it was the same thing. Mm-hmm. So this is all being handed down from somewhere much higher. Mm-hmm. And that's another part that, in days to come we'll address because that's another big part of it.
Let's talk about burglary. It's all the rage. It's a legislative side gig, apparently, now.
It apparently has become a new little, I don't know, hobby. So, I mean, hey, I'm going to go try something. I'm going to premeditatively, I'm going to get up at 1 a.m. I'm going to drive 3.5 hours away. Mm-hmm. I'm going to break into a house. Mm-hmm. I'm going to wear all black. I'm going to put a black hat on. I'm going to do all this stuff. And then I'm going to, after I get caught, I'm going to admit to the police that apparently I'm not really good at this. Mm-hmm. But however, while sitting in committee as a state senator, a Minnesota state senator, knows more than everybody, both sides of the aisle, is the smartest one in the room. But in this one, in the police report, she stated, apparently I'm not very good at this.
Yeah. She also said, I know I did something bad.
Yes, that too.
Yeah. So we're talking about State Senator...
Nicole Richie?
No.
No? No, Nicole Mitchell.
Nicole Mitchell.
Mitchell. Yes. I was close. Come on.
I wonder what Nicole Richie's up to these days.
I don't know. Just the CTH thing, whatever.
Right. All right. So at any rate, yes, State Senator Nicole Mitchell, who over the weekend...
First time state senator.
Yep.
She's in her freshman term.
You got it. And over the weekend, she was arrested for first-degree burglary, which is interesting because it comes with obviously the highest penalties, and
it's felony.
It's a felony, and the circumstances that play into whether or not a burglary is first degree are pretty interesting. One of them is that there's a lawful occupant in the abode at the time of unlawful entry, and so that was the case here. And at first, that's all we knew. At first, all we knew was state senator arrested for first-degree burglary, 4:30 in the morning. She's been booked. That was it. As of this morning, that's all we knew. And then later today, there's been kind of an avalanche of information that's come out during the course of today. And in the gap there, I think it's interesting to consider this in chronological order. Because there was a rumor going around online at the earliest hours of today, before we had any further details, that what was going on here was that she had been staying with a relative who has dementia, and that it was a case of mistaken identity where the relative was like, oh, I don't recognize who you are, calls the cops, and she gets arrested. That was being apparently fished around, and this is all speculative and alleged.
Right, alleged, if you will.
It was being fished around to different media associations and journalists in an attempt to try to undersell the story of, well, this might have just been a case of mistaken identity. At face value, that was absurd. Absolutely absurd. Because if that had been the case, like just imagine, okay, that happens. That exact thing happens. You're at your mom's house. She has dementia. You're sleeping on the couch. She wakes up at 4:30 in the morning, doesn't recognize you because she's got dementia, calls the cops. When the cops get there, they're going to find your vehicle parked in the driveway nice and neat as if it belongs there. They're going to find no sign of forcible entry. They're going to find you with your ID that you can readily present available, not acting in any way suspicious, dressed in bedtime clothes, no doubt. They're going to see bedding on the couch. They're going to ask questions, and you're going to say things like, yeah, I'm here taking care of my mom who has dementia. I'm sorry she called you. This happens sometimes.
Right.
Yada, yada. You're going to be able to work that out. It's not going to end in you being arrested and then them leaving your dementia-rattled mother by herself, right? Like, that's not the way that's
Which is the case this went, where the mother, the occupant of the home, was left there.
Right.
So none of that would actually even make sense. And actually what I did learn yesterday in this whole thing is, through sources, what have you, that apparently at some point, upon her crawling through a window, after driving 3+ hours to get there, and to get into this house, and apparently her dad passed away.
Yep.
So this is the stepmom, and she really wanted her dad's ashes in a flannel shirt, amongst a few other things. But nevertheless, she goes through a window. And so what I did learn yesterday was at some point, when the stepmother heard this ruckus, came to investigate and actually stepped on her.
Interesting. I didn't catch that.
No, what was interesting was that was actually in a news report very early yesterday. And I sent three links to a friend of mine that's kind of got connections in that arena. And then he fired back a text at me telling me, like, well, what you don't know is that the stepmom actually stepped on her. And I'm like, it's in one of those links I sent you. So I went back and read them all. That part was scrubbed. And then upon that happening, the senator, from what I was told, then fled to the basement. and to which is where the police found her. Which, I don't know if it's a walkout basement, but I don't know. Lieutenant Colonel in the Air Force, active in reserves, if you're not smart enough not to run to a basement because there's no way out except the one stairwell in most basements, wasn't a really brave move.
And is that the type of behavior that somebody exhibits when they think they're innocent and they've done nothing wrong?
Well, that's just it. So if, I don't know the circumstances, like, did she just try to lay down so to not be seen? The best thing to do is I'm wearing all black. It's dark in here. If I just lay down, she won't notice me, right? But then she accidentally stepped on her, and then you step on something like, what the hell was that? So that would be one thing, maybe, I don't know. But then to flee, rather than go, hey, Mom, it's me. So none of that whole story they were fishing ties together. Doesn't make any sense.
No.
And the interesting part is, so I don't know if so not only is she a former meteorologist from the local NBC affiliate, Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force in the reserves, a bar attorney, and an elected state senator. And if you're licensed by the bar to be a practicing attorney, do you think she would advise a client to do something of this nature if the client just really wanted Dad's remains back, or a flannel shirt? Would that be the advice that she would advise a client to do? Just break in through a window?
I mean, that's the way. Now what they're trying to do is they're trying to pull at the heartstrings and leverage the recent loss of her father, which obviously is tragic, a personal tragedy.
Sure.
To garner sympathy and say, well, come on, it's the house she grew up in. Her teenage son, I think I saw in a statement that she put out on Facebook, my teenage son used to have a room in this house. It's kind of like going back to the house she grew up in. Trying to downplay it like it's somehow okay. Listen, I'll tell you what. My extended family, my in-laws, we're all very close. They pride themselves on being a very close extended family. Many of us have full access to each other's houses, which is to say we have the means of entry to each other's houses.
Correct.
Okay.
I would say you and I have the same thing.
I would never presume ever that I could go over to an auntie's house or my father-in-law's house or a cousin's house, and because I have the means, and this is with me having the means. This isn't breaking an entry.
This is like having either a key, like a digital code or a key.
Correct.
I mean, right.
Yeah. So even having the means, it would never occur to me to enter their house at 4:30 in the morning, or frankly, any time of the day that they didn't know I was coming over.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it would be equally weird, and I actually have had this happen now that I think about it, for my in-laws to just pop into my house without me knowing that they were coming. They have done that once or twice. But that's mom and dad, right? But this is my point, is that being related to somebody does not grant you license to enter their abode, especially unannounced, and especially when you don't have the means to enter and you're using breaking and entering as your method.
And you're going through a window.
And you're wearing black, and you've got a flashlight and a sock, and you're looking to secure items that you are not authorized to take.
Right.
That's burglary. That's why they charged her. And so this attempt and it's not just the Democrats explicitly, it's also like their ecosphere. Like I saw some guy.
Media.
Some like media person or something trying to make excuses. And it's like, you guys are out of your minds, number one, and absolutely shameless, number two, to be sitting here and trying to downplay this like it's not a big deal, or like we should have sympathy for her. If somebody did that to you, I don't care if they were related or not, you would feel violated and properly should feel violated. And in this case, the stepmother doesn't just feel violated, she sought a restraining order.
And was granted one.
Against the gal.
Correct. So she's clearly of sound mind that she requested a restraining order.
Right.
Thus was granted somewhere after 11 a.m. this morning at Central Standard Time.
Right.
Because that was the court time today.
Yeah.
And I believe the next, her next pretrial thing is June 3rd, I believe, which is conveniently only a few weeks after we get out of session.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, for those that don't understand, the Senate in Minnesota has a 1-seat majority.
Yes.
Taking her out of the ability to have a vote would basically block their ability to pass any more of their
unilateral one-party
bills.
Can't get a single Republican vote legislation.
Right. It would because a tie vote is a dead bill.
Yes.
So they would not have it at that point. Mm-hmm. And so it'll be really interesting to see how they do this. So my speculation is they're going to have her vote remotely because they have that in the Senate. Mm-hmm. Post-COVID, because Carrie Diezick's doing it right now with her cancer issue. So they're allowing her to vote remotely. So why would they allow this gal to be there at the Capitol? Mm-hmm. Because you know that there's going to be media there. That's going to want to talk to her. You know there's going to be conservative legislatures in the Senate that when it opens up to floor debate.
Yeah, will Senator Mitchell yield to a question?
Will Senator Mitchell yield to a question?
Right.
And how do you stand on, whether it's a public safety bill or something that you could tie into it? Because you can't get into motives.
Correct. Or personalities.
Yeah. That's against the rules. But there's certainly always an avenue.
100%. And we all know it.
To tie it together if you want to. Mm-hmm. And even if you want to break the rules and just go all in, just get it out there.
Why not get called
and then
out
get
of
called,
order?
Ruled out of order, so be it. Get told to sit down and shut up.
And then the next guy does it, and the next guy does it.
Yeah,
exactly. And so we know what they're going to do because they've already telescoped it. So Senate Majority Leader Aaron Murphy put out a statement that was very vague and very sympathetic to her, while acknowledging tacitly
her being the Senator Mitchell. Yes.
Yeah. While kind of like tacitly acknowledging, this wasn't good. And packaging it something to the effect of like she's going to have a lot of work to do with her family and friends over the coming days and weeks. Trying to make it sound like it's a personal issue that she's going to have to deal with on her own time and that has no bearing upon the business of the Senate. So the implication there is very clearly we're not having her resign and we're certainly not going to keep her from voting because we need that vote.
Well, and so what they're doing is they're making her the victim. She's got things to deal with.
Correct.
And she does, because she made some really stupid decisions.
Correct. No, and it is worth noting...
She did break into somebody's home at dark time.
And it is worth noting, this is generally how they think about criminal justice and public safety. Generally speaking, they have an outsized disproportionate amount of sympathy for perpetrators and very little sympathy for victims.
In the previous part we were talking about, what happened to #MeToo? I mean, they were the victims, right? That was the whole thing.
Yeah.
And now we're, like in the previous part we were talking about, these kids could likely will become victims. Mm-hmm. Where's their Me Too? Mm-hmm. And now we have this woman her house was broken into on Sunday morning at 4 something in the morning, and I think the senator is 49, I believe the article says. Mm-hmm. Her age is 49, so this woman's got to be 50, 60, 70 probably, at least. Mm-hmm. So an elderly person, right?
Yep.
And she hears some kind of ruckus and goes to investigate, probably living home alone. From everything I've read, there was just those two in the house.
Right.
And, I don't know all the circumstances between the two of them, nor do I care, but somebody broke into your house. Now, interestingly enough, when the girls are gone from in my world. I mean, I'm pretty protective with it, no matter what. But and I have protective measures, if you will. But what's really interesting when I'm home alone, I'm more sensitive because I have less ears. So I make more precaution when I'm home alone because if they're not there, like if they travel for something. Because there's multiple access points and all these different things, and so I'm far more conscientious about that. And you think about a single female, which probably 70 something, and home alone, and somebody breaks into your house. I mean, that could have turned out really ugly, depending on the person. I mean, we're talking outstate. This isn't the urban area, and now they're trying to make the senator out to be the victim. Because all the criminals are now the victim.
Yeah. Well, and especially when they hold a one-seat majority in a legislative body that they need in order to pass their radical legislation, they're definitely a victim.
Well,
under those circumstances.
And I have heard or read, I don't know which it was, but, if this senator would have done it in the metro, she would have been kicked loose in probably 20 minutes.
You got it. Yep.
But she went to outstate. 3.5 hour drive in the middle of the night, and here we are. Yep. It'll be interesting how they play this out and how they navigate these waters because, they called, both sides of us have called for different people. They actually, if you look at it, Ken Martin, who is the Democrat head of the Minnesota Democrat Party, we call it DFL. No other state does, but Democrat Farmer Labor Party. And last week he had to call on Alexandria precinct, BPOU, to withdraw the endorsement of a really bad candidate that was running against Representative Franzen.
Still is, as far as I know.
But he called on them to pull back that endorsement,
which they still haven't done, as far as I know.
And I'm not positive if they have or have not.
I don't think they have.
And but because it was so egregious, and now you have an elected person.
Yep.
That made it through the system, the vetting system. I mean, they put me through a vetting. Did they put you through a vetting?
Sure.
I mean, I got drilled with questions. Like, what do you got any skeletons in your closet? You got any of this? You got any of that? Well, I don't know. They did this, I did that, and, how long ago? All that stuff. But apparently, somehow, both these two slipped through the cracks. Yeah. So they have, and it wasn't that long ago. We had John Thompson. Yep. And John Thompson was, he had some interesting attributes about him. So you kind of like have to wonder like how far is it going to go? What is?
Well, this is pretty far.
What is normal?
This is pretty far. You know how I know that they know they're in trouble? Because the one thing I haven't heard yet, and I know we will hear eventually, is but Trump. Right? Because Trump has all these indictments against him and these cases that are ongoing. And I haven't heard that argument yet of, well, you guys don't get to complain about the burglar who's also a senator in the state of Minnesota because you're the guy who you guys are putting up for president has all these ongoing cases against him. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think the reason why we haven't heard that yet, I mean, I haven't even heard it from like the nobody trolls on Twitter. Maybe I've just got them muted. But I certainly haven't heard that argument put forward by anybody of any prominence. And I suspect that the reason why is it sounds, at least to my ear, very desperate. Like if you're having to pull the rhetorical smoke bomb of but in the face of one of your people having been arrested, caught red-handed in like all but the Hamburglar costume burglarizing one of their own relatives. Okay, like you can't really but that. Like that is pretty clear cut.
It'll be interesting to see where they take it.
Yeah.
That is true. Another thing, because I think we kind of like hammered this thing out, whatever her name is. Senator Mitchell. She clearly made a really bad decision. And watching her navigate these waters, my understanding is this could have a detrimental impact on her pension from being a lieutenant colonel.
Sure.
It could have a detrimental impact on her bar license.
You got it.
And it could have a detrimental impact on her current position as a state senator.
Yep.
All for a flannel shirt. I get the body remains, sort of. Ashes. But that's something you could have argued if you're a lawyer. You would argue that case in civil court and try to go say, but it's my dad.
Right.
And this was certainly not what any lawyer would advise any client to do, in my opinion, anyway. Unless you were a really shitty lawyer, so you probably shouldn't have hired that one. One other little thing we got to touch on. So the other day, last week when we were in session. Representative Engen was there, and he's kind of been hit and miss. He had a little guy that was born, and I know that you two did a video not too long ago. And we were walking up the stairs side by side, going up to the chamber, and so I asked him. I said, because for the context of this, his wife went into premature labor at 28 weeks, so about 11 weeks premature, and kind of came out of nowhere. But so to understand the story, so I said, "Did you literally catch this little guy?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said to him, because I can't help myself, I guess, "Good thing you had all that experience in minor league baseball. You're a good catcher." And then he was telling me about all the different little things about how good that little guy is doing.
Yeah.
And so then I because this kind of goes back to the first part we were talking about, the importance of kids. And, number one, the gleam in his eye, right?
Yeah.
And first-time father, all that stuff, relatively new to the marriage life and all that, and much younger than you and I. Mm-hmm. But... And just to listen to him, and this little guy, I don't know if he showed you the picture of the footprint, the ink footprint that they do. Yep. That was pretty unique as well. Yes. And maybe we'll have to get a copy of that.
Yeah, people won't believe it if we say it.
Right? Yeah, no, we have to get a copy of that. Yeah. Maybe we should blow it up and put it like a big banner.
We get ourselves a proper studio, we probably should get a blown up copy of that footprint framed and have it in the background.
No, that would be, because genuinely it is, I don't know. We can just assume that we all look for things to make it fit our narrative, but when you see something that blatantly
it's pretty explicit.
Yeah, no, it's pretty clear. And so, but all in all, we talk about all the challenges that when you live in a liberal state, when they have the trifecta, there are things and challenges constantly. I'm a person that does not believe in problems. I believe in opportunities and challenges. Because if that way, there's always a path to overcome.
Right.
And that's where we're headed. And I think more and more people are coming to that, and to just that little glimpse of hope or like sunshine with Everett being born, mm-hmm. and just listening to all this, and as premature as this little guy was, and then the circumstances of how it all played out is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a tremendous testament. It is the most pro-life story I've ever heard in my life, in terms of demonstrating the obvious humanity and inherent value of children in the womb, because he had about 12 more weeks to cook. And it is currently legal in this state for all 12 of those weeks and all 28 before, at any time for any reason, to terminate that life.
And to actually dismember it piece by piece. And not only that, I typically, I've been in the the hospital when a baby was born, right? With my daughter was born. And, they got to use a little suction thing to get all the fluids out of everywhere, and then all of a sudden they start to cry. Mm-hmm. This little tyke, well, he's just caught it, started to cry immediately. There was no intervention to extract the fluids out of the nose, the mouth, the throat, all of that. This little bugger just started bellowing. That doesn't really normal.
Yeah.
If you talk to, from the people I've talked to, and I don't know, through COVID, I've kind of gotten to know a lot of medical people, like an insane amount of medical people, and based on all that. But this is a unique thing, a unique story, and the fact that Elliot, not knowing what he was doing, but he did everything right.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything wrong, waiting for first responders, and everything just fell into place. And so this little tyke, I think it was like 3 pounds, 8 ounces or something like that. So, or maybe a little bit more, 312 or something like that, but under 4 pounds. So just
well under 4 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah, just a little itty bit, and I don't know. It's you got to take those highs when you find them.
Yeah.
And you find those gleaming moments. And once in a while, some of what we do outside of when we're on the floor or outside of the Capitol, there's often things we can do that have a very positive impact on constituents or people, whether they're my constituents or not, I don't really care, but I took an oath to the state constitution and one to the United States Constitution, so as far as I'm concerned, you're pretty much all a constituent. And, whatever I can find to help connect dots. And that's kind of one of the little things that I do. And, you have your niche that you have really well dialed in. And so this is the beauty of the importance of having everyday layman folk representing the people.
Yeah. Yeah. Good place to leave it. Yeah. We'll chat next week.
Absolutely.
All right.
The Hudson-Mekeland Podcast, with hosts and Minnesota State Representatives Walter Hudson and Shane Mekeland. Follow, subscribe, like, and share to show your support. On X, find Walter at Walter Hudson and Shane at Shane Mekeland, spelled Mekeland.